Hi everyone, it's Luane here from the Glover Agency in Fenton, Michigan. And I have an interesting story that I want to share with you today, if I can get my hair out of my face. That's really got me thinking. You see, a friend of mine who is an agent, a real estate agent in northern Michigan, shared a fascinating transaction that she was working on. So here's what happened. Her buyers made a cash offer on a property for close to $400,000. The sellers had multiple offers and they countered back to the cash offer and asked if they would bring their offer up, that they would accept it. And they also agreed to close within 14 days, and they agreed to a home inspection, which was a pass-fail inspection. And really all inspections are pass or fail, but this just means that the buyer was not going to be nitpicking about small repairs. Either the property was going to meet their standards or it wasn't. So after the inspection, the buyer contacts the buyer's agent, and they said that they found a few things that they didn't like when they were doing the inspection and that they were going to fail the inspection and back out of the purchase. Now, it's important to note that the inspection portion of the contract was written and agreed to by both parties, and the inspection had to happen within 7 days, which it did. And once the final test results were received by the buyer, once that test came back, the buyers would then have 2 days to notify the sellers whether they were passing or failing the inspection and staying in the purchase or getting out. So they were within the time frame in which they could walk away. The water test actually came back the following day. So the buyers were well within their due diligence period. So the buyer's agent contacted the seller's agent and let them know that they were dissatisfied with the inspection and that they would like to rescind the transaction. And this is where things got a little tricky. Well, understandably, the listing agent was upset. And of course, the seller was upset, as well as the buyer's agent, because none of us gets into this business to do these kind of things. They don't happen that often, or at least they haven't to me. And when they do, it's kind of a big deal. Nobody likes to have this happen. Initially, Mr. Seller refused to just let them out of the contract altogether. I guess he was going to force them to buy his house. But after he settled down a little bit, he realized that he really couldn't force them to purchase the home. So he decided that he would release them from the contract, but they refused to refund the buyer's earnest money deposit of $10,000. Now, it's important to note that the earnest money deposit is not actually held by the seller. When an earnest money deposit is received, it is placed in an escrow account that is pertaining to that transaction, and it is held by either the title company or your attorney or whoever is handling the closing of the property, and that is not either one of the brokerages. And the only way to get an earnest money deposit back is to either A, close on the property, and then it shows up as a credit on the buyer's side of the settlement, or the buyer and seller have to both mutually agree to release either all of the earnest money deposit or a portion of it. And if agreement is not reached, this money could be held for up to a year. Now, the home was only off the market 9 days, and as luck would have it, the sellers quickly reverted to a backup offer. And this was a higher offer price, $10,000 higher than the previous buyers. But it was contingent upon final approval of a loan, so it was going to take a couple of weeks longer to close. If a buyer is getting out of a contract through one of their contingencies, such as the due diligence period, maybe an appraisal that comes back below the value of the contract, or even a final loan approval, and these are the top reasons why these things happen, the earnest money deposits generally are not held when buyers use an agreed upon contingency to terminate the contract. And you can write any kind of a contingency into an offer as long as both people agree on it. I've actually had dogs that transferred with houses before. A common one with sellers is finding suitable housing. The deal could fall apart if they can't find a house they like. And this situation just doesn't seem right to me. The standard purchase agreement in Michigan includes several contingencies that are written right into the contract, like closing by a certain date, having a home inspection, final approval of a loan, adequate appraisal. And if a buyer is not satisfied with an inspection for any reason, they have the right to back out. That's exactly what happened here. I know that if I were in this situation, probably the first thing I would try to do is have my broker reach out to their broker. It's a simple matter of understanding that the buyers met all of their contractual obligations and that withholding the earnest money deposit is not only not justified, but it's really unfair. Most likely, if they went to court, the sellers would end up spending more money than the $10,000 earnest money deposit. And it's very likely that they would not prevail and would end up having to pay the buyers their $10,000 earnest money deposit and court costs. This is not resolved at this time of taping. So I'd like to know what you think of this and what your thoughts are on it. And it got me thinking about a transaction that I had way back in my first year of real estate where I was on the opposite side of this situation. So this client of mine in my first year of real estate was shortly after the 2008 crash, and they put their home on the market for $100,000. And we got a full price offer within several weeks. And so the security deposit, which these are normally 1 to 3% of the purchase price, was only $1,000. Now everything was going along fine, and the inspection occurred, and their due diligence period had actually just expired. So we thought we were moving forward, and I got a call from the buyer's agent telling me that the buyer wanted to rescind the sale. Now, this is the day after their due diligence period was over. Now, the reason for doing this was because the seller, who was not supposed to be at the inspection, sellers, you should never be at your inspections. It's extremely dangerous, and this is just one reason why. My seller stayed at the inspection and apparently made several comments about the fact that he was unhappy with the wiring that had been done in the garage that he had built. Being an electrician by trade, he wasn't happy with it. And so this spooked the buyers and they wanted out. However, the problem for them is that they were not within their due diligence period. It had expired. So technically there was no way for them to rescind the contract and receive their deposit back. And my seller was a little bit of a difficult seller, didn't really have a very soft heart toward them, and he decided that he did not want to refund the EMD. So we put the house back on the market, and it sat there. Now, this is the day before Thanksgiving. We sat there for the next 4 months until we got another offer. And this time, the offer was $8,000 under the original offer. Eventually, my clients and the original buyers reached an agreement to split the EMD deposit just so that they could both move on. But the lesson here is that it's really crucial not only to understand the terms of your contract, but also what the criteria is for you to receive your earnest money deposit back. As my friend and I were ending our conversation, we both were kind of imagining what this might be like in this current market that we're in, where buyers are now having to pay some or all of their buyers' representatives' commission. So they tend to feel that if I just go right to the listing agent, they can write the offer and they can help me and help the seller. But what you need to understand is that the seller's agent or the listing agent is contractually obligated to put the seller's best interest ahead of yours. So trust me, going into the purchase of a home without having your own representation can cost you a ton of money, because trust that listing agent is not going to write anything in your favor. He's not going to write the contract dates in your favor. Good luck trying to get an earnest money deposit back like in this situation, because none of that is going to be written in your favor, because it can't be. They cannot represent their seller to the best of their ability and help you. That just doesn't happen. So don't forego buyer representation. Do not give more of an EMD than what is the threshold for small claims court in your state. In the state of Michigan, that's $5,000. A $5,000 earnest money deposit is plenty. In the situation of the first buyer, they would have only had to put down $4,000. And something tells me that since the sellers were getting the full price for the property, or getting the price they wanted for the property, they probably wouldn't have had too much of an issue if they'd only put down a $4,000 deposit. And then finally, do not stay at your inspections. Honest to God, that same client, when I went back to when they had their second buyer, now I told him why they pulled out of that deal because he was talking about the wiring. And I told him when the second inspection happened, do not stay for this inspection. You need to get out of there. And he told me that he would. However, I decided to drive over to his home and make sure that he did. And of course, when I got there, guess who was standing in the driveway yakking up the inspector and the new buyers? So I walked up, looped my arm through his and said, come on, let's go, and took him to his car so he could leave and that the inspection could go forward. The reason why we always tell you to not be present during the inspection is if you say something, if they ask you something, for instance, like how old's the roof? And you say, oh, I don't know, it's maybe 7 years old. And on your disclosure, you said it was 5 years old, you could get sued. So when your realtor tells you to leave during the home inspection, do so. But also bear in mind that this is probably the first time that the seller or the potential buyer has had any amount of time in your home. And you know how it is. You walk into a home, it's like, oh, it's so gorgeous. It fits all of our needs. It's wonderful. And then you come back the second time and you're looking at it with a different set of eyes, a little more critical eye. And you might be noticing things that you didn't notice the first time around. That is why we have inspections. And that is why we ask the sellers not to be there, and why we want to be really careful with our buyers and make sure that they understand that they are buying a home that was previously owned. It is not going to be perfect. There will be items like messed up paint here and there or little things that are wrong. And that's true of every house. I have never been on a home inspection where there was absolutely nothing that could be addressed. Whether the buyers decided to address that with the sellers, what might be another story, because sometimes there is a backup offer involved and they might not want to because they're fearful that they'll revert to that backup offer and drop the contract, which they would have the right to do if the buyer comes back and says, I'm not satisfied. In many of these areas and contingencies in the purchase agreement, both the buyers and the sellers can get relief. So you have to be careful what you say and what you do. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts on this topic. And please share this with somebody that you know who's looking for a home, because it might be information that they could really use. And also hit like and subscribe, because I am trying to get to 1,000 subscribers in the next month. So I appreciate you guys. Have a great day.